Are you ready for a weekend in hell?
If not, allow us to help.
After 2.5 years without a single edition of Paris-Roubaix, the Hell of the North, the Queen of the Classics, this weekend will have the 4th edition in the space of just over 6 months.
On Saturday it's the 2nd edition of the women's, and on Sunday the 119th of the men. We'll have live coverage of both on GCN+, more details on that later.
Before that though, we are going to go through the routes for this year, the favourites to take the win, and also find out how Manon here got on as she went over the cobblestones with SD Works last week.
It was tough. From the comfort of the team car, Dan, won't lie.
Let's start though by looking back at 2 spectacular races that we witnessed last October.
Look at the effort now etched on the face of Dylan. 125 years we've waited to see that shot. There can only be one ever first winner of Paris-Roubaix. Lizzie Deignan makes history here in Roubaix, and fittingly it's going to be the greatest of all time that will stand alongside her.
You are, and you will be forever, the first rider to win Paris-Roubaix Femmes.
Women's cycling is at this turning point, and like you say, today is part of history.
Let's fly, and Colbrelli making his move. Half a lap remains in Roubaix. Colbrelli through the centre! Colbrelli through the centre! Viva Italia! Forza Italia! Sonny Colbrelli is the winner of Paris-Roubaix. Pure emotion and a victory that will last a lifetime.
Really, you have just won Paris-Roubaix. What's going on in your mind?
Unbelievable. My first Paris-Roubaix, and I win, I don't know. I'm very happy because today is a legend of Roubaix, no?
They were brilliant races, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, neither of last year's winners will be competing this year for 2 very different reasons. Lizzie Deignan is expecting her 2nd child, whilst Colbrelli is still recovering from the cardiac arrhythmia and the subsequent operation to fit an internal defibrillator.
Get well soon, Sonny. I will go through the riders who are competing later on, but first, let's look at what they're tackling. The men start from Compiègne, as they have done since 1977. They take on 258 Ks with 30 sectors of pavé, which total 55 kilometres. The first 96 Ks are paved and gently undulating roads, but then the fun begins, doesn't it?
Fun for us, but maybe not for the riders, Dan. Those cobble sections are brutal, but it should be fun to watch at least.
Yes.
The first of the 30 sectors is at Taville-Arnchy, a stretch that has been given a 2-star rating by the organisers. The breakaway, assuming one has been formed by then, will be able to enter the cobbles in a reasonably relaxed manner. But the fight in the peloton to reach them in the front will be intense, to say the least.
It's always intense. It will continue to be intense, you'd imagine, for the rest of the race, and particularly for that first 4-star sector, which comes at Quevy-Saint-Python. That is the equal longest of the entire race at 3.7 Ks. And we'll likely see a few riders struggling to stick with the pace, you'd imagine.
Yep, there are 8 more cobblestone sectors to be ridden before the first 5-star one comes along, the famous Forest of Arberg. This is the most brutal section of road in cycling. I would rather ride up a 25% gradient than ride over those cobbles. They are so big, so uneven, and quite frankly, frightening.
It is frightening, isn't it? Even when you've ridden them before or seen them up close before, you quickly forget just how gnarly those cobbles are at the Arberg. I can't believe actually they used to race to them at 60 km/h plus on just 22mm tyres. Anyway, as brutal as the Arberg is, the race is not won there, but it can be lost, as that old cycling cliche goes.
The women's race, meanwhile, is 125 kilometres long, and it starts with 3 laps of a circuit around Dinan, just as they did last year, and then joins the men's route on the 17th sector at Ongang-Wandini.
Which is the other sector that's 3.7 Ks long. And now for the men, that comes after 175 Ks of racing, but the women hit it after only 42. That was where Lizzie Deignan made her move last year, which ended up being the winning one. So you'd imagine every rider and team is going to be very alert from that first sector of the race this time around.
Roughly 30 kilometres later, we have the second of 3 5-star sectors, or the first of 2 for the women, Mons en Pavel. It's 3 kilometres long, often muddy, often selective, and it comes within just 48 kilometres remaining, so it's not going to be a huge group that goes into it.
You wouldn't have thought so, would you? I mean, last year, Diane was almost midway through her solo attack by the time she got there, wasn't she? Jenny Moscon was away in the men's race, but would come unstuck a little later with a flat tyre followed immediately by a crash. Believe it or not, there are still 10 sectors to ride between Mons en Pavel and the finish line, including the third and final 5-star sector, or the second and final for the women, the Carrefour de l'Arbre. That is a road that has seen race-winning moves go in the past.
Colbrelli making his move. Colbrelli starts to open up the gap.
And it's made even harder by a very sharp left-hander, which takes all of the speed out of the riders.
If it is a group at the front of the race on the entry to the Carrefour, you can guarantee at least one of them will try to make a difference here.
You would have thought so, wouldn't you? Once that one is done and dusted, you get some respite of about 50 metres before you hit the Gruson sector. Then it's Willem and finally the relatively easy 300-metre Roubaix sector, which comes with just 1,400 metres of the race remaining.
Then it's on to the Roubaix Velodrome, a welcome sight for every rider, whether you're first, last or anywhere in between. Reaching the finish line is an achievement in itself. Achieving it first puts you in the cycling history books forever.
Imagine entering the Roubaix Velodrome in first place as a solo rider. I can't imagine that feeling. Right, before we get on to the favourites, we'll give you some more details of our coverage of the races on GCN+. So things kick off at 12:15 BST on Saturday with the breakaway. Orla, Magnus, Adam and Danny Christmas will build up to the women's race, with the first live pictures coming at 12:30. And now this year, we have got some slightly extended coverage from ASO, so we won't miss any of the cobblestones for the women, thankfully.
On Sunday, the breakaway with Orla, Adam and Lloydie here starts at 9:30 BST with live coverage of the race starting at 9:55.
Yeah, so hopefully you haven't got anything at all planned apart from watching a bike race this weekend. The races are available if you are in Europe or the Asia Pacific, excluding China, New Zealand and Japan. Whilst we do have the women's race available for you in the USA, but unfortunately not the men's.
Beyond the live coverage, we've also got a whole host of paris-roubaix content for you on the app this week, free for anyone to read, so keep your eyes peeled for that, as we'll be releasing an in-depth written preview across 6 languages, plus stories from the race's hallowed past.
And we'll be looking at whether or not Filippo Ganna stands a chance of winning. But just before we get on to the favourites, a quick look at the all-important weather forecast for this weekend.
Last year, the women had horrific weather, making those cobblestones incredibly sketchy, which led to several crashes. This year, however, it's looking a little bit more promising. 19 degrees, tropical with some sun and some clouds. I'm sure the riders will be very pleased about that.
I think a lot of them will be quite relieved. It was dangerous last year, wasn't it? Sunday for the men's race will be slightly colder than the Saturday at 16 degrees. But I reckon that's pretty much perfect racing conditions. So it looks very unlikely that we are going to see a repeat of last year's mudfests.
In the men's, we look no further than Mathieu van der Poel, third last year at his first time of trying, and this year is a race you would have thought is made for him. And given his form at Flanders, he has to start as red-hot favourite.
Well, you'd have thought so, wouldn't you? Particularly given that Wout van Aert has had to take some time off the bike due to COVID. And his participation is still in doubt as we record this preview show. That's a big blow for him, but also for us as fans and viewers as well.
Now, Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl are normally very top of our favourites when it comes to this race, but this classic season they have had one to forget, haven't they, the Belgium squad? Not only have they not won a single one, they've not even been in the top 10 of the monuments this season.
No, although to be fair, they have been affected by illness, but then so have most of the other teams in the peloton, haven't they? Their hopes on Sunday will mainly rest on the shoulders of Kasper Asgreen. He was good at Amstel last Sunday, but Stibart and Seneschal will be hoping they can get themselves up the road too. Last year's runner-up, Florian Vermeersch, will be hoping to avoid the bad luck that he seems to have plagued him over the last few weeks. But even if he does, it's going to be difficult to equal or better his ride from last year. Victor Campenaerts is racing here for just the second time, but based on how he's raced so far this season, he'll be aggressive. He will. Loves racing, does our Victor, doesn't he? He does. And now if Van Aert doesn't start the race, then Jumbo-Visma will be hoping that Christophe Laporte can continue his incredible run of form this year. But they've also got Mike Teunissen and Nathan van Hooijdonk as outsiders. But I am particularly interested to see how Eduardo Affini gets on. He hasn't really shone at his previous 2 participations, but I would have thought that this race should really suit him as a rider.
And the same can be said for Filippo Ganna, who makes his much-awaited debut at the professional paris-roubaix. He won the under-23 race back in 2016, and he's obviously got the power to motor over those cobbles like Cancellara. In fact, Ineos have got a strong team for the race, with Ben Turner, Luke Rowe, Donald van Baal, plus the strong American Magnus Sheffield.
Strength in depth, I think
Definitely.
you could say, is Ineos Grenadiers for Sunday. And the same could be said for Bahrain Victorious, couldn't it? With Milano-Sanremo winner Matej Mohoric, who's joined by Heinrich Hausler, Jan Tratnik, and Fred Wright as well, who's been one of the revelations of the season so far.
He really has been strong this year, hasn't he?
He has been, yeah, top 10 at Flanders. And you know what, though? We've got this far through our big preview show, and we are yet to mention the 3 previous winners on the start line. Greg Van Avermaet, Nicky Terpstra, and John Degenkolb.
Maybe because they don't have a chance of winning, Dan.
Ouch!
Well, Van Avermaet might have a chance on the podium, but we've not seen anything from Terpstra or Degenkolb to suggest they might be up for a win.
I think I would have to agree with that, even though I don't want to be too harsh on them like you, Manon. Trek Segafredo do have a chance, though, I think, with Sturven and Pedersen, as do Groupama with Stefan Kung. And I actually think that this could be the race that suits him the most of all the classics, as it offers the best opportunity for him to go solo to the finish.
Yeah, he hasn't got much of a sprint on him, has he?
No.
Although they do have Demar, who does, and Alexander Kristoff is definitely worth a big mention. He took his 83rd pro win last week at Scheldeprijs, and that is his first ever solo win, I believe.
I know, amazing that, wasn't it?
His results in Roubaix aren't as impressive as they are at Flanders, but nevertheless, there seems to be no reason to think he couldn't be right up there on Sunday.
I'd agree with that. Never finished higher than 9th in Paris-Roubaix, which I was surprised about when I looked that up a bit earlier on today. Peter Sagan, unfortunately, is not set to compete this year, from what we've heard. He's still not got to the root of whatever it is that's hampering his performance at the moment. So, Total Energies will be looking to Anthony Turgis, whilst Michael Matthews will be hoping for some beginner's luck because he starts his first ever Roubaix on Sunday.
It'll be interesting to see how he gets on, won't it? Neil Pollitz leads Bora Hansgrohe as a former podium finisher in this race, as is Seb Van Mark of Israel Premier Tech. Although it's safe to say that he and the team have had their fair share of struggles with illnesses this year, haven't they?
Doesn't feel like Seb's ever going to get that really big win in the Classic, does it? Connor Swift will be leading Arkea Samsic, Trenton UAE, and Garcia Cortina Movistar. It's definitely worth mentioning Uno X, though, because that's a team that's always willing to race hard, and they often punch above their weight in the process. I would not be at all surprised to see them get a big surprise result in the top 8 on Sunday.
The most experienced man in the race, though, is Manon of Movistar, who is starting the race for a record equaling 17th time. Bonkers.
That is absolutely bonkers, isn't it? 17 participations at Roubaix. He hasn't finished all of them, but he has finished most.
Imagine
Unbelievable.
that. On to the women's then, and you've got to say it's a reasonably open race with just one edition so far. We're yet to exactly see what riders it suits the most.
Well, I'm betting that it will suit the Belgian national champion and Flanders winner, Lotte Kopecky.
Probably.
She's got a background in cyclocross, hasn't she? So you've got to say she copes pretty well with mixed services. Plus, having 2 big wins to her name already this year, you'd imagine she'd be eager to add another one this Saturday.
Definitely. She will have a super strong team around her with the likes of Chantal van der Broek-Black and Christine Madras. I was lucky enough to have been invited along to the recon of the race, and they were flying over the cobbles.
That full video is out for you to watch on our main GCN channel now, should you want to go and watch it. Another rider that's very comfortable over the cobblestones is Marianne Vos. She was runner-up at the inaugural race last year, and more than likely is wanting to go one better this year. She even skipped the Amstel Gold Race, her home classic, so that she could concentrate fully on Roubaix. Her teammate Anna Henderson, who's also been looking super strong this year, will be looking to get herself into the early breakaway. She's a rider that suits the race well because she's strong, she's got the skills to ride on the cobbles, and is very aggressive too.
She is, yeah. For the women's Trek Segafredo team, I'm sure they will be aggressive and try and retain the title of the cobbles. They secured 2 of the 3 spots on the podium last year with Elisa Longo-Borghini. She could very well be the leader of the team this year.
Although don't forget about Ellen van Dijk.
Definitely.
I think she's a real strong case for the win this year. She's insanely powerful, as we know from her time trialling, and she could easily go solo at the end of the race and take the win, I think.
Yeah,
World champion Elisa Balsamo is another rider that we shouldn't overlook either. 3 big wins so far this season, and will definitely be a contender if the race somehow manages to stay reasonably together, or even if it splits given how strong she's been looking in 2022.
Definitely, and you can add Cinderbrand into the favourites list too. In the unlikely event of a group sprint, we can't look past the likes of Team DSM Lorena Wiebes or FDJ's Marta Cavalli. Cavalli was 9th last season and recently won her biggest race of her career at Amstel Gold with an insanely strong tack in the closing stages.
Yeah, she'll be full of confidence, won't she, after that
will be.
major win. Grace Brown could also be a threat for the FDJ team if she's recovered from illness. Annemiek van Vleuten will not be racing Roubaix on Saturday for Movistar. I guess that's understandable given how hard she crashed last year, almost career-threatening it looked to be at a point. But that will give freedom to Emma Norsgaard, who was in the top 10 last year. You'd imagine as well that's a race that really will suit Norsgaard as a rider.
Yeah, and Marta Bastianelli will have the hopes of Team UAE ADQ on her shoulders. The great thing is, though, it's literally anything could happen on Saturday. We might even get a surprise winner. Emerged like we did in Amstel Gold.
Well, that's the advantage of having so few additions, is that we are still trying to establish which teams and which riders are really going to be the best over the cobblestones of Roubaix, because they are so much harsher than they are in Flanders. Right, all that leaves us to do then is make our predictions. You've got one favourite and one outsider for the men's and for the women's races, Manon. Who are you going to go for?
After watching Lotte Kopecky on her recon, I'm going to go Lotte Kopecky.
Right. Nothing to do with her Flanders win then?
Well,
Just
yeah,
the
that helps as well. For outsiders, I'm going to go Anna Henderson. And for the men, I'm going to go Matthew van der Poel. And for the outsider, Magnus Sheffield.
Oh. Yeah, he has been strong this year.
Yeah.
I think he's just turned 20, hasn't he?
Really?
So he wouldn't be a
20.
teenage winner.
Yeah.
But yeah, Grand Prix d'Annan, where Roglic was riding over some of the same cobblestones as Roubaix, he was brilliant. So that is a decent outside pick.
What are you going to choose?
I'm going to go Ellen van Dijk
Good
of
pick.
Trek Segafredo and the women's. Like I said earlier, she's so strong, isn't she? If she
is,
does get away and does get a gap, she could do a Diagnon
She
like
could,
last
yeah.
year. Outsider for the women's, I'm going to go with Audrey Cordon-Ragot. Partly because we haven't mentioned her, partly because she works for us quite a lot at Eurosport and GCN.
Yeah.
But also because she's just a blooming good rider.
She is,
isn't
very
she?
strong.
So again, with such a strong team, strength in depth, they've got numbers to play, so she's got a chance. On the men's, this is going to be boring. I'm going for Van der Poel as well. I mean, it's hard to look past him, really, isn't it, for this race, particularly if Van Aert doesn't ride on Sunday. But my outsider, also from Ineos Grenadiers, Ben Turner.
Also a young rider.
He is, yeah, man of the match of the classic season so far this year. He's been so strong, I just sort of think he might need protecting status on Sunday for Ineos Grenadiers. He probably won't be because it's his first ever paris-roubaix.
You never know.
But based on what I've seen, he deserves it. Anyway, let's head to some other presenters for their predictions for the weekend.
My favourite for paris-roubaix women is Lotte Kopecky. My favourite for paris-roubaix men is Alexander Christophe.
Right, men's race, I'm going to go Wout van Aert. I think if he's in good shape to start, I think he'll be right ahead of the race. And in the women's, I'm going to go Lotte Kopecky.
Yeah, I'm going to go Lotte Kopecky in the women's too. In the men's race, I'm going to go with Team DSM. Clean sweep of the podium. Apparently, they've got this inflation device to adjust their tyre pressure as they go, which can save them 30 watts on the road sectors. If that's true, then Degen Colt and, Nicholas Arndt, they're going to be right up there. They're going to win.
Clean sweep of the podium. Right, you heard it here first. See ya.
Elisa Balsamo, Matthew van der Poel.
Hi guys, my favorite for Roubaix is definitely, and even more than in the past, Mathieu van der Poel. I think he learned enough last year and he's going to win this one. For the women's race, I think is the one for Marianne Vos, and she definitely needs this one in her palmarès, and she will get it.
Right, thanks for watching, everyone. Let us know your favourites down in the comment section below.
We hope you'll be able to join us this weekend for our live coverage on GCN+, plus the pre and post race shows. Bring it on! See you then.